In this week's news, Microsoft's HoloLens, Pepsi produces a smartphone, Dell acquires EMC for a whopping $67 billion, and BlackBerry's Priv smartphone could be the last device the company makes.
All this and more on this week's episode of Bandwidth Blog on Air. Welcome to episode 14.
Welcome to Bandwidth Blog on Air, the weekly podcast of bandwidthblog.com.
Microsoft also announced that it will make HoloLens development kits available in the first quarter of next year. Very unfortunately, it'll cost $3,000. Now, and that's not going to be in the price range for anybody that's a normal consumer. So these development kits are either going to be there for people to build their applications before the retail product launches, at which point we hope it's going to be a lot cheaper than that, or it's going to become a specialized product that's going to be used by businesses and perhaps in education, and not for the general public. What do you think about this price point, and do you think that Microsoft are kind of missing the boat here?
The $3,000 price tag is unfortunately in a unique place where it would break both my wallet and my heart because the HoloLens as a product is something I've been greatly looking forward to testing, and I think at this price point I think it's solely going to be limited to the developer version. I don't think Microsoft would have had any intention of unveiling it with the demo user playing Minecraft if they had absolutely no intention of bringing it to a general audience. And hopefully when they do that, it'll be positioned at the right point. So someone like me who is an avid gamer want to say, I want to go out and buy this and try it. Especially for people invested in Microsoft's Xbox console or even Windows 10, I think it'll be something that'll have huge resonance if Microsoft play their cards right. I think for $3,000 for a developer version, that is on the pricey side. And hopefully with that, at least with that price point, to my mind, at least we'll see big companies hopefully take on HoloLens as a product to use when they're developing their own apps and games. We've already seen earlier this year that Nokia came out with the Ozo camera, which is solely going to be used for professional purposes. And I think Microsoft at the moment are hedging their bets, hoping that HoloLens will be adopted in the same way as well as to a general audience. All I can say really going forward is that I hope when HoloLens does eventually come to a consumer market that the price is a lot more attractive. Also now coming on the 20th of October this month from Microsoft is a brand new Xbox One wireless controller adapter for Windows 10 devices. You're going to be able to use your Xbox One controller with your Windows 10 PC, and you're either now going to be able to use it to play games natively, that being games optimized for Windows 10, or you're going to be able to use your Xbox controller to play through your Xbox One through a game that is being streamed to a Windows 10 device. And it's really interesting to see where Microsoft is going, both with HoloLens and the wireless display adapter, because it's really indicative of their new approach, which is bringing all Windows devices under one banner and being thoroughly integrated with one another, which is something we haven't seen successfully done from Redmond in a really, really long time.
Yeah, I think that's a great move, and especially with all of the devices that was launched at last week's event, I think it's a massive boon for the company to be able to offer this suite of products that will essentially be running off of the same software.
Well, in wacky and wonderful news, we've heard something really, really interesting today, which is that Pepsi is officially going to unveil their own smartphone exclusively in China. What can you tell us about that, Theunis?
Well, as is the nature for these kind of rumors, not much as of yet. But what we do know is that at first news broke regarding a verified Pepsi phone Weibo account, which is, of course, the Chinese version of Twitter. Now, we didn't report on that previously because I seriously thought this was a bunch of bollocks, really, a big hoax. But what we know now is that the Weibo account is still standing and it's been verified. And there's a picture with the text showing Pepsi phone in Latin letters, which you almost never see in China, so that seems to lend some credibility to the rumor. The rumor suggests that it'll be showcased on October 20th. It'll be a 5.5-inch display. It'll also have decent specs for a pretty low price. It'll come in at about $205. We're not sure how that'll translate into international costs. The other specs that we think it'll be including will be a full HD display for that 5.5-inch one, an octa-core 1.7 GHz MediaTek CPU, 16 gigabytes of internal storage, and a 13 megapixel rear camera paired with a 5 megapixel front-facing camera. Another interesting tidbit is that it'll have a massive 3,000 milliamp hour battery, which is quite large for a phone of this size, and only having a full HD resolution and not a quad HD. What do you think about this rumor? I mean, can we really honestly expect a soda company to bring out a phone?
Well, I'm actually still trying to get to grips with it myself. But something which I find pretty interesting, presuming that, you know, all of this is absolutely legit and it will go forward, in China at least, is $205 is actually not a lot of money for those kind of specs. And I think if were we to look at it, at least in the South African market, that would be a really competitive phone. And that's really not something we've seen before, is a big corporation from an almost entirely another world like Pepsi or let's say Coca-Cola, their arch rivals, developing a smartphone. And I think they could actually speak to an interesting maybe development in the future, at least in sort of sub-Saharan Africa where we are, where these countries could perhaps look at moving into the tech space and producing really affordable handsets with these sort of specs and features. Do you think that's ever likely to come to us all the way here in South Africa?
I definitely think so. It's probably not going to be within the next 6 months, but with Huawei making big waves in the country and throughout Africa, we're always excited for these Chinese companies to come to our shores. We also know that Meizu is definitely coming to Africa. It's actually the same person that brought Apple to South Africa that started the iStore. He's decided to bring the Chinese brand into Africa. So I think there's a lot for us to be excited about. I think especially in the lower end of the market, there's going to be a lot more competition very soon.
Well, in other surprising news, Michael Dell has decided to make history in that Dell has now agreed to buy EMC Corporation for a deal that's worth, you know, just a really measly $67 billion.
Yeah, some chump change.
What are your thoughts on this, Theunis? Do you see Dell going anywhere exciting with this acquisition, or is it more boring corporate news that somehow managed to make the headlines?
Well, for the average person, it's probably some boring news. But I think in the tech sector, it is quite an interesting story because not only of how much they're paying for the company, but who they are. So, I mean, obviously the name EMC won't mean much to anyone really that isn't really familiar with what they do. But some of their subsidiaries and products are. So they sell cloud services, storage and analytic solutions to enterprise companies, and EMC owns the security firm RSA. Now, they are probably a little bit more prominent on the international scene. And they also have VMware, which is a virtualization solution. Now, this is all a lot of corporate mumbo-jumbo, I know, but the fact that this deal is so huge and is being billed as the largest tech acquisition in history, you know, it is something to mention, and that's why it probably made the headlines. The biggest question was, how did they actually buy this company or buy it for this price? Because Dell in itself is probably only worth half that, which is really interesting that they can afford a company that's twice as large as them. So the deal is being financed by MSD Capital, which is Michael Dell's own investment firm. So that basically answers the question of where the money is coming from, and it's going to be a consortium or a partnership with Silver Lake, which also helped Dell's takeover of the company he founded in 2013. So the reason why this is relevant is because it'll form a giant enterprise computing company, and it'll make some waves in the field, I think. Now, Brian, we've reported on this device quite a bit over the last couple of weeks, and the biggest reason was because it would be BlackBerry's first Android phone. But now we learned some other interesting news regarding this phone and the future of the company. What exactly did we learn?
From what we've heard from BlackBerry this week is that BlackBerry's Priv, which is their upcoming and first Android smartphone, might as well prove to be their last. At a panel interview at Code Mobile, BlackBerry CEO John Chen has said that the company might have to quit the hardware business if it isn't profitable by next year, basically meaning now that BlackBerry seem to be really hinging all their hopes and dreams on this phone, which I think is sad in many ways, and that BlackBerry has been such a force in the tech industry for such a long time now. What are your thoughts on this, Theunis? Do you think that the Priv is likely to succeed based on what we know at the moment?
To be honest, I was very skeptical at first, but now, seeing what we have seen, I really think they've got a shot. I think they're bringing something new and interesting to the Android market. I mean, previously I kind of scoffed at the slider, but having seen the device in more detail now, it looks really nice, and I think there is a real market for people that would, you know, like to shift between the QWERTY keyboard and the touch screen. on the other hand, whether they'll be able to make enough money to to stay in business, I'm not sure. John Chen actually said that they would probably need to sell around 5 million of these Priv handsets to stay in business. Do you think that's attainable?
Oh, well, that's definitely not a small number. Globally, I'm not too sure, but certainly in South Africa, I think BlackBerry still have a really good brand resonance, and a lot of people are still interested in their products. So I think it's likely that the Priv will probably get some good exposure, or at least reception, in South Africa. How far that'll extend to, I don't know. But I think definitely, if it is BlackBerry's last shot, I think it'll be one that'll definitely be heard and felt in South Africa. And I do think, especially in the corporate environment, people will be quite eager to pick this up, because generally, when I speak to people, opinions quite divided on whether they like that physical QWERTY keyboard or not, but an Android slider, I think, is quite a novel product, especially here in South Africa, and I'm really eager to see how people pick that up.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting for me to see how this phone actually resonates with the business community, because that's, of course, where their strength was all those years back when they were dominating the smartphone market. The CEO actually said that the Priv stands for privacy and privilege, which is,
we really hope so.
Yeah, and that's an interesting jumble of words there to throw into a relatively short smartphone name. Whether they'll be able to translate that into usability and sales, we're not sure yet. But what he's also said, which I think is really at the core of what they're trying to achieve, is they want to bring the BlackBerry security know-how to Android, because we know that's a big shortcoming in the Android ecosystem. Do you think there is a real need for more privacy within Android? Do you think people really care about that? Because I think BlackBerry can bring that.
Well, it's a question I've actually got two answers to. I think, yes, Android could use the BlackBerry's know-how in this regard, and I think a more secure device is what we all really want at the end of the day. I mean, no one wants to really ever have to be worried about the latest stage fright virus or something like that. But that being said, security is never an exciting feature of any real product unless you're looking to secure something specifically. And
unless you're trying to do something dodgy.
Exactly. Unless you specifically want that security now for a very particular purpose, I don't think it's not really a marketable factor. I mean, to be honest, when I choose between my devices when it's time to upgrade or buy something new that I'm interested in, security really is not really a driving factor for me. I always kind of consider security, like I imagine most people would, as kind of an afterthought. Maybe I'll get an antivirus for it if something goes wrong, and maybe I'll do backups. But it's not something that really drives at any kind of excitement or fear or anxiety I have. And it'll be interesting to see if that translates to sort of consumer pickup at the end of the day. But that being said, I look forward to see where BlackBerry sort of goes with Android, because, like I say, I think they could bring something meaningful to it.
Other than that, Brian, what do you think about the name Priv? I mean, it's a weird name, and we're not even sure if it's Priv or Priv, or I mean, it's so difficult to sell a product if people can't even pronounce its name.
It's an easy example to draw reference to, but names needn't be hard, and I think Apple does their names really well. What phone do you want? iPhone. What tablet do you want? iPad. What computer do you want? Mac. It's easy, it's simple, you remember the name, it's got good recall. Priv, I have no idea where BlackBerry really think they're going with this. It's horrible, it's short, there are too many connotations, some unpleasant if you really think about it. And at the end of the day, back when this device was sort of in under code name, I much prefer the name Venice. I think that's really short, beautiful, succinct, has a good connotation with an amazing city, lots of history and heritage. So I have no idea why they didn't stick with that.
Well, I agree with you on the name. I think it's much easier to have a name that's a word that people actually know and know how to pronounce. I do think, though, the reason they changed the name is because when I think about BlackBerry and I think about Venice, there are some interesting connotations. For example, BlackBerry is very akin to Venice in that Venice is slowly sinking into the ocean, and perhaps that is what they were trying to get away from.
I'll bet you that was discussed in a boardroom somewhere, and someone realized the the similarity between those two names.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Review Spotlight, where we discuss our thoughts on the latest review devices to reach our hands.
In this week's Review Spotlight, we're carrying on with our discussion over Alcatel's Fire E Firefox OS smartphone.
That's another question I have. How different is it to other operating systems? Because from what I've seen, it looks pretty standard. I mean, you've got the notification drop-down, scrolling throughout apps, and the home screen seem to be pretty much the same as on any other operating system.
The best way I think I can sum up the feel of Firefox OS is it feels like Apple taking the mickey out of Android and then Android trying to lampoon iOS. It feels very much in the middle of those two worlds. Like I said earlier, you've got sort of your elements that carry over from iOS. So once you've installed an app, it is on your desktop, on your phone's desktop, whether you like it or not. There's no foldering, unfortunately, so that's also another bugbear of mine at the moment. What it does do, though, which I find interesting, is that you can change the layout of the phone to act either vertically or horizontally, which I think is interesting. By default, it works vertically, and now I've set it to work horizontally just to be a little bit different. So it auto-arranges your apps, and then obviously you can move them about as you would more or less on iOS. And there's really nothing that's actually that you wouldn't find really on iOS or Android. You've got your notification center with your quick toggles. The one thing that does irritate me is that there's no consistent back button within apps. So you either have to press the home button and hope you go back home, or what you have to do is swipe from the sides of the bezels of the actual device to swipe between your most recently used apps, or to close them you hold down the one hard button on the phone, and then you can either close all apps at once or individually. So there's no great shakes really out of anything that you've experienced on Android or iOS, and this is where my issue comes in, is that there's no real diversity. I haven't really plowed through the Firefox marketplace too much yet, but that being said, the Alcatel Fire E does come with actually a nice selection of apps to start you off with. But otherwise, there isn't really any new exciting feature, which I think is actually disappointing, because to get people interested in Firefox OS, I think you need to be really, really different. And there's nothing really that's that exciting about Firefox OS at the moment. I hope future updates fix that, because I think it has good potential. In our second sort of gadget feature on our review spotlight today, we have a product which I think BlackBerry could take some notes from, in that we have the beautifully named Razer Seiren on Theunis's desk. Now, the Razer Seiren is a USB-powered microphone, and we're actually using it to record this episode of Bandwidth Blog on Air. What can you tell us about it, Theunis?
Well, what I can tell you thus far is that the installation is some of the easiest you'll ever find, because it's USB plug and play. The inputs are very simple, very easy to understand. I didn't need to open any kind of literature to know what I'm doing with this microphone. And to be honest, I haven't used a lot of these desk stand microphones before. So just the ease of use really impressed me right off the bat. Other than that, I mean, it's beautifully designed, it's sturdy, it's completely built out of metal, and it also comes with a pop filter and a hinge that you attach so that it can hang from the top, and it doesn't need to stand on a desk. I think it's a really nice piece of kit. There's a small little LED display where you can also change the volume of the output sound, which you can actually plug directly into the microphone. Other than that, I mean, we've only been using it for a couple of hours, but I have nothing to complain about, and I'm really forward to really putting it through its paces in the next couple of weeks, perhaps also with some more stringent tests, some more maybe music, singing, and see how it handles that.
That's all for this episode of Bandwidth Blog on Air. Thank you very much for joining us.
Be sure to get your entries in for our Google Cardboard giveaway, which is going to end in a couple of days. And then we'll also be launching a brand new smartphone giveaway in the next week. Thank you very much for joining us. This was episode 14. We hope to see you next time for episode 15 of Bandwidth Blog on Air.
You've been listening to Bandwidth Blog on Air, the weekly podcast of bandwidthblog.com.